With the NFL draft literally about a week away, it seems as if Brad Holmes could be making ready for a move that could really spice up the draft this year. Hope y'all got your popcorn ready, because it's about to get fun.
What are we? What makes us what we are and what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. It doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and 3 toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10-5, end zone, touchdown, Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello all Lions fans, and welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike, and as always, we're diving on in. Here's the thing, folks. When it comes to the NFL draft, for us Lions fans, this draft right now is probably the biggest draft that we've had since the previous one. Because every single draft that we have had with Brad Holmes always has the ability to be something that is going to be big. It's going to be something that's going to be spectacular. It's got potential to really be something of a very important, crucial, and exciting nature. However, though, as we already know, the draft this year being in Detroit adds yet another layer of excitement. It adds yet another layer of anxiety, and I'm not talking like bad anxiety, I'm talking about good anxiety, because it's like, hey, there's just so many things that are going on with the draft this year that it's like, hey, we're ready. We are excited. We are wanting this thing to get going as soon as possible. However, though, there's always something else you can add to this conversation that definitely makes it yet a more intriguing, a more exciting prospect. And what could possibly make the draft more exciting than the potential of trades? And I'm telling you this right now, if there is one guy in the NFL that you definitely need to be on your toes with when it comes to the NFL draft and when it comes to trades, it is definitely Brad Holmes. Brad Holmes, every single year that he has been the GM of the Detroit Lions, has made trades, whether up, whether down. And I'm going to say this right now. Most of the trades that he has pulled off in the draft have almost always worked out beautifully, not only for him in terms of player acquisition, but also for him and how it has worked to set up moves later on down the road, whatever the case might be. Point of the matter is that the conversation of trades of itself are awesome. The rumors of trades are awesome. But when you're combining that with the draft in and of itself, and the draft being such an unpredictable, I would just say, machine of what it is, it makes it just a very tantalizing conversation to have. So that's what we're going to talk about here, because I fully 100%, down to my core, believe that Brad Holmes is going to make a trade or two sometime during this NFL draft. I just believe it. Again, he's done it every other year. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't do it this year. But the trades that I have got on my mind, again, this is not coming from insider sources. This has not got anything to do with this is just me spitballing. This is just me saying, hey, I'm looking at situations from where I'm sitting as what people would call it, an armchair GM, and I'm like, okay, here. These are potential moves that I think the Lions could, have emphasis on the word, could be interested in making, depending upon, one, the price, depending upon what's going on in the draft, so on and so forth. So that's where the nature of this conversation is coming from. Again, I'm not saying that I've got somebody that's telling me this. I'm not saying anything. I'm just simply saying, hey, based upon what I'm seeing, based upon what I've read, based upon what I've heard, these make sense to me. So, without further ado, let's get into them really quickly. When it comes to the NFL draft this year, we already know as Lions fans that there are certain positions that the Lions desperately would like to add more talent to. Not necessarily that it is an all-out need, like they have to do this or they're going to be considered a failure for the draft, but it's like, listen, there are certain positions where there is a much higher precedence of getting a more talented player added or adding more talent to the overall mixture of what they already have. Now, depending upon who you talk to, that position could be edge rusher or it could be cornerback, because again, that is right there primarily the two top positions that most people are looking at when it comes to the Detroit Lions. I've talked about it several times on my channel. However, if I was the one being asked, I would say that cornerback is a much higher area of precedence, because it's like, listen, We showed last year, at least with Aiden Hutchinson, that we can get consistent pressure, at least from him. And we've also added guys in the offseason through free agency. We went out, we got Matthew Betts from the CFL. I'm looking forward to seeing what he has to offer. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't add another edge rusher sometime later in the draft, also potentially as well. I just think that if you're trying to make a priority list about who's the more of a precedent need, I think that the cornerback position is probably of a much higher one than the edge rusher, at least at this point. Now, I have talked about, good Lord, multiple different types of cornerbacks over the course of this offseason. Several of them. I've talked about Kyrie Jackson. I've talked about, Kool-Aid and Kinistry. I've talked about Mike Sanderstill. I have talked about quite a number of different cornerbacks that the Lions have either been connected to or that I think the Lions could really be interested in. I've also talked about TJ Tampa. These are all guys that people have had some sort of conversation piece when it comes to the Lions in terms of cornerbacks. However, though, I also know this about Brad Holmes. And again, I don't know if it was said about him or he said it himself. All I do know is that it was said somewhere that Brad Holmes is a snob when it comes to cornerbacks. He is very, very particular. He is very persnickety about what he is looking for when it comes to cornerback play. Well, here's what I also know for a fact. Cornerback is one of the most difficult positions to transition from in the college ranks as far as being successful there to being successful in the NFL ranks. Well, here's what I'm saying here. What's the potential likelihood that Brad Holmes tries to circumnavigate that issue and says, okay, instead of taking a cornerback with my top pick in the NFL draft at pick number 29, which I know some Lions fans are very keen about not wanting to have happen, what if I circumnavigate that problem and I go out and I trade for yet another veteran corner that is on the market as a potential trade option? Not something that is necessarily out of the realm of possibility, and it's definitely not something that I wouldn't, put it past Brad Holmes to do if he doesn't like anybody in the draft as much as I do. Because again, even though I'm saying I like certain guys, I'm not the guy in the chair that's making the calls in freaking in Allen Park or right there in freaking, where they're doing the draft. I'm not the guy doing that. So I was like, okay, here, let's say Brad Holmes decides to, draft an edge rusher at pick number 29, which he might very well do anyway. Well, who's a good cornerback that's currently available on the market that, the Lions could go after that wouldn't necessarily break the bank, but at the same time would still add more talent to a cornerback room that was desperately in need of infusion of said talent in this offseason? And for that, we're going to go right back to the same well that has been talked about before. And that's cornerback of the Cleveland Browns, Greg Newsome II. Again, this is a name that has been popped up several times by Lions podcasters in the past. And for me, there's a lot of good reason as to why that's the case. Because Greg Newsome is a guy that is starting to come into his own as a cornerback. First and foremost, we have to understand something about this. He just played with the Browns, and the Browns last year had one of the best defensive secondary units, and honestly, one of the best defensive units is total when it came to the NFL. So it's like, okay, we clearly know that Greg Newsome can at least ball if put in the right situation. But on an individual level, if you take a look at PFF last year, Greg Newsome actually played very, very well as a cornerback, both as a man cover corner and as a zone cover corner. If I recall correctly, according to his NFL passer ratings, I think that his man coverage passer rating out of all cornerbacks that were graded was ranked 32 out of like some 100 plus whatever cornerback. So again, pretty solid. And I think it was like in the low 70s as far as the overall rating. The zone coverage, pretty much the same thing. It was a little bit better. The zone coverage was a little bit better both in terms of the NFL rating and in terms of the ranking in regards to other cornerbacks. So it's like, hey, you have a solid guy who can be both solid in man cover corner as well in, zone cover corner. So it's like, okay, if you were to potentially get Greg Newsome and pair him with Carlton Davis, that would arguably, in my opinion at least, be the best cornerback tandem that the Lions have had in Detroit for a long time. And again, that's not necessarily saying that we still couldn't potentially see something out of Emmanuel Mosley, because we know that he's still on the roster. We just haven't really seen anything about him because of his injury. And we also have guys like Gilmore's brother. We still have Stephen Gilmore on the roster who could potentially blossom into something. All I'm simply saying is this. If Brad Holmes is not potentially wanting to wait for a cornerback to develop, which I don't think that's necessarily likely, because if we know one thing about Brad Holmes, he has no problem developing people. But if he's looking for something that is more of an immediate impact, going out and getting Greg Newsome and pairing him opposite of Carlton Davis definitely fits the bill, and it's definitely going to take care of that problem. So that's trade option number one that I could potentially see, that I'm potentially proposing. Now, trade option number two. Some people might think I'd probably propose an edge rusher here, because that is the other position of top priority, in my opinion, for the Lions in this draft. However, though, I don't think that is going to happen, because typically when a trade is on the case, when you're talking about this for the draft, it usually means that the draft class that you have has a high amount of possible players that you could use to plug in somewhere. Well, the cornerback class this year is particularly deep. The edge rushing class is not. So I don't really think the Lions would be able to find a whole lot of suitors or even decent enough players at the edge rushing position from other teams in the NFL that would be willing to deal in the first place. So I'm not going with edge rusher as my second proposed trade. My second proposed trade is actually for a wide receiver. Now, I already know this for a fact. There are some Lions fans that are not going to want to hear this, but we already know this for a fact. The Lions are probably going to add yet another wide receiver, because since Josh Reynolds left in free agency and he's now with the Denver Broncos, the Lions kind of need another wide receiver in that core to add to it. That's not to necessarily say they don't have talent in that core. They do. They've got Amon-Ra St. Brown. They've got Jamison Williams. They've got Donovan Peoples-Jones. They've got Khalif Raymond. They've got talent in the core. But we also know that it's usually a good idea to have about 5 wide receivers that you can rely on at any given moment. Well, currently the Lions only really have 4. I know there's other ones like Kennedy and Green that we also have, but those are guys that I only want to see if we're in a dire strait kind of an emergency, and that's not a place I want to be. So let's think about it here. Could the Lions draft a wide receiver this year? Yep. Could possibly happen too. And I think that out of the possibility of drafting a wide receiver and trying to have an immediate impact versus a cornerback and having an immediate impact is much more likely. I mean, crying out loud, we just did it 2-3 years ago with Amon-Ra St. Brown. What's to say it couldn't happen right now with somebody else that we could pick up in the draft? And again, much like cornerback, I've talked about several guys, such as Luke McCaffrey, such as Brendan Rice, such as Devontae Walker. These are all guys I've talked about as potential, players that have some sort of tie or some sort of interest that the Lions could potentially go after. But again, let's just say potentially that Brad Holmes wants to be frugal and doesn't necessarily want to spend a top-end pick necessarily for some of these guys. Luke McCaffrey, maybe not so much, but it's like Rice, Walker, those are guys that are considered second-round, third-round picks. Maybe he doesn't want to spend that much on them. Maybe he wants to find someone that's a little bit more frugal, but could still potentially have an impact. And for that, I introduced to you this guy who was a former first-round pick that the Lions had connections to when he came out of college 2 years ago on a top 30 visit. And that is Treylon Burks of the Titans. Now, again, I already know for a lot of Lions fans, they don't want to hear this guy's name because this guy has been an injury-prone machine ever since he got into the NFL ranks. The first 2 years that he's been in the NFL, he has had nothing but injury problems. But we have to understand something here. This is the kind of a deal that Brad Holmes looks for. He's looking for guys that he knows are talented. Regardless of whatever else you want to say about Burks, Burks is talented. He's big-bodied, he's fast, he has the ability to make dynamic catches. The problem with Burks is his ability to stay on the field, which maybe what he needs is a change of scenery. Maybe what he needs is a change of role rather than being a potential top number 1 option or number 2 option, being something closer to like a number 3 option. Because again, we already know that Jamison Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown are number 1, number 2. So what if we take Burks and we just use him as a big-bodied number 3 option? That might be the change of role and scenery that could get Burks a much more healthier amount of not only receptions and production, but it might also take some of that pressure off of him having to perform right away. It's just a potential idea, folks, because again, from what I've been hearing, the Titans are looking to potentially move off of Burks, and it might not cost that much. There's a lot of speculation that maybe the Titans might move off of him for a day 3 pick because he's been, like I said, largely underwhelming. He's been largely a disappointment for the Titans at this point. And they would probably want to get something rather than nothing out of him yet again. So that's trade option number 2. Now, trade option number 3. This is the one that really intrigues me the most. This is the one that I think could really have some potential for fireworks to really get people interested in the Lions yet again for this draft, more so than what they already are. An inter-trade, like, swapping of draft picks. This is what I know Brad Holmes does very well when it comes to this kind of moves. Now, the Lions currently this year have 8 draft picks, but to be realistically honest, they don't have a draft pick in the 4th round this year, and they really have a huge gap between their 3rd round draft pick at pick number 73 and their next draft pick in the 5th round at pick 164. So how could the Lions potentially either one add more of what I would call juice, more meat in the middle of the draft, or potentially try and get more volume? Well, there's only really one way you can do that. That's by trading down. You have to add more volume or more meat by trying to trade down somewhere. And for this, I propose this trade. Again, this is a proposal. It's not something I've read anywhere, at least as far as I know of, but it's one that I have definitely been using in mock draft simulators, and when I took a look at the trade value charts, it's definitely very applicable. Here's the proposed trade. The proposed trade is this. The Lions take pick number 73. They also take pick number 201 or 205. It pretty much has the same value no matter what chart you're using. And then they take one of the 4th round draft picks that they have next year, and they trade with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to get the 89th overall pick and the 92nd overall pick. So what the Lions would be in essence doing is they would be trading their 3rd round pick that they have remaining this year. They would be trading one of their 6th round draft picks, and then they'd be trading a 4th round draft pick next year to get 2 3rd round draft picks. Now granted, those 2 3rd round draft picks are a little bit later in the 3rd round. But if there's one thing I know about Brad Holmes is that it doesn't necessarily matter how far back you got to go for this kind of stuff. You can definitely make this crap work if you just know what you're doing. And if I know this, Brad Holmes could take 2 draft picks in the 3rd round at picks number 89 and 92 and make that work for the Lions' benefit, because we kind of already saw him do it in 2021 when he drafted back-to-back in the 4th round. This would be just the same thing, but just one round earlier. That, to me, is a very intriguing prospect, because at that point, then, now you have the potential to get a 1st-round draft pick, you have the potential to get a 2nd-round draft pick, and then you have the potential to get 2 3rd-round draft picks. Again, I go back to last year in 2023's draft. Brad Holmes got 4 immediate starters in his first 4 picks. Imagine if Brad Holmes could do that exact same thing again, and really the only thing he's giving up is a 6th round draft pick on top of the 3rd round that he's trading down, and a 4th round draft pick next year, which we already have an extra 4th round draft pick. That to me makes a hell of a lot of sense in my opinion. If I can get another 4 immediate starters or 4 really good players, and all I'm really giving up is a 6th and a 4th round draft pick for next year, sign me up, baby. I'll go for that all day. That's just my personal opinion right there. But anyway, my whole point is this. You can use any one of these trades, and Brad Holmes could use them to find ways to improve the roster. Whether it is, as I said, going and getting Greg Newsome and pairing him opposite of Carlton Davis. Whether it's out and getting Treylon Burks and using him as more of like a number 3 wide receiver opposite of Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Or Brad Holmes going all in and saying, hey, I want to get more draft capital in the middle of the draft where I can really bulk up this roster, maybe get some more immediate starting talent or players that I can plug in immediately that I can use as role players that aren't necessarily starters, but they have still a high impact volume. That's what I'm talking about. All of these trades, in my opinion, have the ability to have an impact that could make an immediate, some sort of, I would say, ability for the Lions to yet again take another step forward. The question is, 1, whether or not Brad Holmes is going to make one of these trades, which I can't say for certain, but also number 2, if Brad Holmes is even interested in potential trades like this. Again, I'm not certain, but it's definitely something that I wouldn't put past Brad Holmes doing, because Brad Holmes has shown a tendency to want to trade in the past. But anyway, I figured I'd just put this episode together really quickly. It's something that's been on my brain the last couple of days, and the closer we get to the draft, the more and more I'm thinking about it. But anyway, folks, I decided to put together, I've reached the conclusion of the segment, so I'm going to say now, thank you all for watching yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage you all to watch the next episode. Also encourage y'all please to do one of these three things. Like, comment, and subscribe. If by chance you subscribed in the past and you forgot to do so at the time, or you just subscribed and you not had a chance to do so, again, please, please, please subscribe. We're almost to 6,000 subscribers. We're very, very close to getting back to where it used to be on DLF. Let's keep pushing forward. And also encourage in doing that, please, after you subscribe, make sure you turn on that bell notification icon as well, so that way you never miss any more content that I push out. Again, the more that we can get you guys coming back on in, it also helps the channel as well. I also encourage y'all please to share this content with your Lions friends and family members. Share here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it anywhere and everywhere you can with everybody and anybody that you can. The more we share it, the greater the channel grows and spreads. And with that, folks, I just want to say to everybody again, thank you all for being an awesome, amazing crowd and community. You guys are just the best. And I also want to say, hope you all have got something in your life that makes you happy, makes you smile, and I hope you all are having a great day. Hope you enjoyed the content as well. And with that, God bless to you one and all. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.